Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves. And we're going to let the oracle that is known as Google introduce them via alphabetical order. So Bill, you're first today.
Hi, I'm Bill Fawcett, editor, author, game designer, and recent books include Never Again Military SF Near Future, and looking forward to this conversation because I work with the 1632 people as part of their board.
Outstanding. And Bill, as someone who's been an editor before, you'll get a kick out of this. Every time I do one of these panels, my mom, who's my first line editor, sends me letters about I went to college and I should know that we alphabetize by last name, not by first. So I get letters. And it's my own mom who heckles me. So
take your phone out and show her you can do it by first or last name on the contacts.
It wouldn't make any difference.
That might get me smacked. She still bops me on the back of the head sometimes. All right, next we have Mr. Harry Turtledove. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners? Although I can't believe anyone wouldn't have heard of you.
I can very easily. I'm Harry Turtledove. I'm an escaped Byzantine historian. I write alternate history. I write other science fiction. I write fantasy. A lot of it's historically based. When I can get away with it, I write historical fiction. I tell lies for a living. What can I tell you?
It's an outstanding answer. All right, next we have Miss Mercedes Lackey.
Hi, I'm Mercedes Lackey. I write fantasy, alternate history, a little bit of urban fantasy, even some comic stuff, superhero stuff, and I think my book totals up to 146 now.
Yikes. That's some dedication right there. I actually know one of the people you podcast with, Veronica Jaguar. I'm probably butchering her last name. She gets mad at me all the time. But she's on a different podcast that I listen to, and she's part of that Secret World Chronicle stuff that you guys do.
She's awesome. She is absolutely awesome. We have a backer kit for a short story anthology, and she's doing the audiobook version.
Nice. She's I've hired her for some audiobook stuff. Hopefully I don't write enough female characters so I can hire her as the main one. I really got to fix that just because I like her voice. She does amazing work on audio.
She does.
All right. Last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Steve S.M. Stirling.
Yeah, I publish under SM Stirling because with my first book, they asked me what I wanted for my name on the cover, and I said, "Oh, just do it the way I signed the contract." I write science fiction. I write a lot of alternate history. I write time travel. I'm working on a time travel series right now. In my first incarnation, I was an undergraduate history student. And I wanted to be a historian, and then I looked into that and decided to do something more reliable, like write fiction. And I haven't looked back since. I was going to boast about my 50-plus titles, but Misty put me in my place.
I'm sorry.
It's just a factor of 3, not that we're counting.
I'm sorry.
So,
Jane Yolen.
We're around 120.
Jane Yolen has us all beat. She's well over 200 now.
That's insane. So I was a recovering history major too. I got my master's at Villanova in colonial American history. So I appreciate the, do you want fries with this is the valid concern for history majors.
Indeed.
Or the all favorite. So you want to be a teacher?
God forbid.
Yeah, I don't like kids enough. I tolerated my own. I don't want to teach someone else's. All right. So this interview, dear listener, came about when we were prepping for one of the episodes I interviewed with Bill. We were just being nerdy about history stuff because it pertained to his military history mech series. And he suggested that we get you guys all on because you guys have all written alternative history and won some awards. So, Bill, do you want to talk about that?
Well, they've all attended and are winners of Dragon Awards.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's something we started about 7 years ago. Anybody who wishes can look up dragoncon.org/awards and sign up for free to nominate and vote for your favorite authors. And it's been going on for several years now, and we're enjoying putting it together. There are several categories, and I think two of this group won it in alternate history. And Misty, was yours in fantasy or?
Mine was in alternate history as well. It
Okay,
was
so we're all alternate history winners here.
sort of alternate history fantasy.
Mhm.
It
And
was
so,
it was for the Silver Bullets of Annie Oakley.
oh yeah,
Mhm.
Okay, now
so
I'm curious. I'm gonna have to look that novel up.
Mhm.
that's fun. dragoncon.org/awards or just Dragon Awards if you search. And worthy people like these can win if you nominate them and vote for them. And it's free and open to anyone who wants to. It's a People's Choice Award.
Mhm.
And I will link to that in the show notes. So if you want to go check it out and nominate, they should be opening that to soon if they haven't already.
It is open.
They just opened it. Okay.
No, they opened it
Don't be
in
surprised.
November.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize it's been that long.
Oh yeah, and then the nominations close in July, and then in the end of July and August, you vote from the list of finalists and pick worthies such as these to win it.
And then we're going to have Bill's going to help me find out whoever the tech person is, because they're doing. You can attend digitally this year if you can't travel for whatever reason. You can listen to some of the panels online. So we're going to see if we can't put that out there for everyone, because that's something that I imagine a lot of our listeners would be interested in, since they're all over the globe. So, all right. So have you read all of the books that won, Bill?
Yes.
Okay. I know your library, I'm told, is gigantic.
No, I haven't won I've won all the alternate histories at one. I didn't read it. I haven't really run any in the fantastic romance section yet.
Okay. I mean, you could fix that though, right? You've got like 1 billion books in your library, I'm told.
I do, but I could, but life is short.
Indeed. All right. So next part of the introduction is the religion questions, and there are no wrong answers on this one, although your books might judge you. We're mixing it up a little bit just because you guys are such fun guests. So we're going to ask each of you what your favorite book that you've written, and we promise we won't tell the other books. So Harry, what's your favorite?
Whether you tell the other books or not, I am going to respectfully decline this question. It's like asking me which my favorite child is. No, I never answered this question.
My favorite child is whichever one isn't annoying me at the moment.
Harry, what's your favorite alternate history that's not yours?
Ooh, probably the Yiddish Policemen's Union.
Mm-hmm.
That is so good. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
My favorite book of yours is The Guns of the South, but I'm sure everyone says that, but that's how I first found alternate history. I got caught sleeping in class because I was bored, and my teacher gave me that book, and I was awake for the rest of the class. So,
Smart teacher.
Yeah, there's the one problem with a lot of the English programs is they never let you read good stuff. They bore you so you hate reading, and so they fixed it by giving me Guns of the South to read.
It was an entirely accidental book. I never intended to write it.
Oh.
Why did you?
Because this back around 1988, fine fantasy writer Judith Tarr and I were corresponding. Neither one of us was online yet. And she was doing one of the things that writers do. She was pissing and moaning about the cover art for an upcoming book of hers. And she snarled, "This is as anachronistic as Robert E. Lee with an Uzi, for Christ's sake."
Okay.
Oh, no.
And I looked at that and I thought, I can do things with that. So I printed out my answer to her. And then at the bottom of the letter, I wrote a hand-scrawled PS. Who'd want to give Robert E. Lee an Uzi? Time-traveling South Africans, maybe? If I write it, I'll give you an acknowledgement. And I looked at that and I thought, I can do things with that. And I Xeroxed it to make sure I didn't lose it because it was just hand scrawl. Mm-hmm. I sent the letter, and there is an acknowledgement to Judy in the book. Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. Did you send her a signed copy? I would want one of those.
God, yes.
That is an interesting way to find a story, but hey, we'll take it. All right, Mercedes, which of your books that you've written is your favorite?
Whichever is the one that I finished most recently.
Mm-hmm.
So
Also
it's an ever-changing list.
Okay. And
now that is actually a different question from which one is the most fun to write.
Okay, which one was the most fun to write?
That's the superhero stuff. Or currently, it's the project I'm doing with the same group that's called Lilith's Lingerie. It's about it's set in 1990s Toronto, and the Adam's first wife Lilith runs a sex toy shop.
Okay. I will have to check that out because I'm going to.
Well, we haven't finished it yet. We're still working on it.
That is just an interesting premise. Okay, and then Steve, what about you?
Which is my favorite of my books?
Yes.
Actually, usually the one I'm working on or have just finished. So that would be The Winds of Fate, which is the sequel to Turn the Tide, which is my Roman time travel alternate history series.
Damn good.
I think so too. My favorite alternate history is one of Harry's. It's the Timeline 191 series that he did, where Lee's messenger doesn't drop the order outlining where all his forces are so that McClellan gets it. And history takes a very different turn there. And that appealed to me mostly, well, partially because it's so well written, partially because the opening scene is so hilarious, where someone picks up the message and he gives them the cigars it was wrapped around. And also it embodies something that I've become convinced of the more I read history, and I read history a lot, is that human history is a bunch of low probability accidents bouncing off each other. Like the 7 Years' War. Frederick the Great of Prussia fought the 7 Years' War to try and keep Silesia, which he'd stolen from Maria Theresa of Austria after promising not to. And he was a great general, but he was like outnumbered because France, Austria, and Russia were against him, and he was backed into a corner, and Berlin had fallen to the Russians. That happened again. And then Elizabeth of Russia died at 53. And her heir, I think he was a nephew, was a besotted Frederick fanboy and changed sides. And the result was that Frederick the Great got a reasonably victorious settlement to the 7 Years' War, whereas they'd been planning on reducing Prussia to a tiny little principality. And just think how different history would be if Elizabeth hadn't died and her heir hadn't been a demented Frederick the Great fanboy. History's full of things like that. Like World War I actually did start because Franz Ferdinand's driver took a wrong turn and then stalled his car backing up just as Gavrilo Princip stepped out of the place he'd mooched off to have lunch after the failure of the first assassination attempt. It was like the Three Stooges from hell. Like he took his suicide pill after he shot them, but his suicide pill was past its sell-by date, and it just gave him a stomach ache. And the one who'd thrown the bomb earlier in the day tried to drown himself by jumping into a river, but it was the dry season, so it was only 4 inches deep. So all he did was sprain his ankle.
And he missed with the bomb to boot. It bounced off the car and injured 2 people in the next car. And that's where the prince was going to visit.
Yeah, that's where he was going to visit.
It took 4 mistakes to start the war.
Yeah. And I don't think Dragovic, the head of the Black Hand, Apis was his code name, actually expected them to succeed, because he picked them all because they were young, and Austro-Hungarian law forbade the execution of people under a certain age. So he picked a bunch of teenagers.
Most of them ended up dying of tuberculosis in prison.
Yeah. It and that's why I exist, because my mother's father was gassed at Passchendaele in 1917 and met my grandmother, who was a VAD nurse, and she'd volunteered to be a VAD nurse because she'd been bombed by Zeppelins in London. She described seeing them in the sky to me once. And so I exist because Franz Ferdinand's driver took a wrong turn and stalled his car backing up.
Funny how that works. War is full of stories like that. So Mercedes, I've the favorite of your books that I've read of the Oathbound, the series that's part of. I can't remember the series name, but that was one of yours that I really enjoyed. And Stirling, your Nantucket series, The Island That Transport. That although when I was researching it, so I got the name right for the series. Was that inspired at all, or was it before the 1632 where that town gets moved?
No, we didn't know about each other's books. We wrote them more or less simultaneously, and
that's why I was asking if you knew. No idea. It's crazy. It was good. I've read yours. I haven't read the 1632 stuff yet, but it's on my list. Mm-hmm. It's just so many of them.
They're big fat books, and there's an awful lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear everyone talk about Brandon Sanderson books, but the 1632 books look like they're getting a run for their money.
Yeah.
There's only 38 of them right now.
Only. Not that there's that many.
My wife's working on a sequel to the last one she did for it.
Wow. Okay, so I got some catching up to do. So that's only like a year of listening. If we do it by audio, maybe I can do like the 2x speed and not tell the narrators.
I should plug a nonfiction book here because two of the gentlemen here are in it. It's called 101 Stumbles in the March of History, and it's based on Steve's theory there. It's 101 mistakes, what happened, and what would have happened to the world would be like if they hadn't happened, all through history.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
A lot of fun and just great for reading in the John.
Bathroom reading is important.
Do you know that Winston Churchill was nearly killed in a traffic accident in New York City in 1930? He looked the wrong way because, of course, the British driver on the other side of the street, and he stepped out, and he got fairly badly injured. If he'd been half a step further out, he would have died. And Lord Halifax would have been prime minister in 1940, and things would have been very different.
Yeah, history is full of those moments where someone had blinked wrong and it had been a whole different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
But I think everybody's family history is sort of replete with those stories as well. So,
oh yeah, I mean, I owe basically my entire life from the age of about 14 on to finding Sprague de Camp's Lest Darkness Fall at a secondhand bookstore.
Yeah,
I paid 13 cents for it.
Brilliant.
Because I bought that book. Let's see, I studied what I studied because I got interested trying to see how much Sprague was making up and how much was real. And the answer was he wasn't making up much, and most of it was real. And I wouldn't be married to the lady that I'm married to because I met her when I was teaching at UCLA because the professor under whom I'd studied Byzantine history had a 2-year guest gig in Greece, and I was taking his classes for him. I wouldn't have the kids I have. I wouldn't have written most of what I've written. I would have written something. I might be David Brin if I hadn't run into Lest Darkness Fall,
He has more hair.
You're not nearly as shall we put it, emphatically self-assured.
I don't talk about it as much.
Mm-hmm.
I actually majored in history because your book showed me that history didn't have to be boring. It was just a story of people.
Oh yeah.
Because history in school, they tend to focus on like dates and times, and this battle happened on this date at this location, and they don't really get into the people that make up those stories. So yours was the first one I realized that the people in history were actually people, and thus they were interesting.
Well, thank you.
And then right after that, they introduced me. I don't know if you've ever read the book Ghost Cadet.
Don't know that one.
It's set at VMI. One of the cadets that died at Newmarket's ghost haunts the battlefield because he lost his watch. And so a young boy who's grew up without a father meets him in the battlefield, and sort of he finds the watch so the ghost can find peace, and he learns how to do boy things.
Okay.
But it's I found that one right after I read Guns of the South, which was way more mature of a book than Ghost Cadet, which is intended to be a young adult story. And those two made me realize history was just stories.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stuff that happens in history, if you put it in a book, even though you know it really happened, people are like, they're never going to believe that. Take that out.
Yeah.
I've had that happen a few times when I point out that I stole it from history first.
Fiction has to be credible. Real events don't.
Absolutely.
It's funny when I sold the Videssos books to Lester Del Rey, to really get my career started. Lester wrote me and said, one of the reasons I like these is that they seem so plausible, and yet they're not based on any real historical example. And of course, this is all, very, with the serial numbers barely filed off Byzantine stuff that I was doing. But Lester, I'm glad you're happy. What am I going to say?
Oh, no, you're wrong, Lester. Don't send me more contracts.
Don't throw me in the briar patch.
No, please don't throw me in that briar patch.
Editors are never wrong.
No.
They may be somewhat mistaken.
Actually, I think that editors are never wrong when they see a problem. They just don't necessarily know how to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So Stirling, so Harry talked about how he wrote his iconic alt history story. What about yours? How did you get into that as a genre that you write in?
Well, if you read history, you always, or at least I am always thinking, well, what if that hadn't happened? That was a bizarre accident. I started writing Island in the Sea of Time when, my wife and I honeymooned on Nantucket. And we went back there whenever we could afford it at the same time. And we were walking on our favorite beach there. And I saw the lights of a ship going by off towards the horizon. And I thought, Nantucket feels isolated, but it isn't really, because it's in constant communication with the mainland. What would it take to really isolate Nantucket? And then I had a flash, and we turned around and I went back to the hotel room and I started making notes. Jan was used to that by that time. So
I know this feeling.
So that's how you, okay. What about you, Mercedes, for your first alternative history story? How did that come about for you?
Well, now are you talking about stories or books?
Either one. Because short stories used to be more common than they are now.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember which was my first story.
One of the early ones, then.
Well, one of the early ones, since I mentioned the racing. One of the early ones is Dance Track, where James Dean becomes a race driver primarily, instead of primarily a movie star. And he is mentored by Isadora Duncan, the dancer, who did not die with a thing around her, with a scarf around her neck. Instead, she became an ambulance driver in World War I and got the bug to drive and became one of the first female racing drivers.
Okay, that's interesting.
I actually owe my involvement in alternate history to Harry. We were working on something else. He says, "Bill, you're doing military. Do you want to do one for this alternate generals thing I'm putting together?" And I had Napoleon take the priesthood instead of military academy, because that was the choices, which would have made him devotedly behind royalty and beating up those ugly revolutionaries.
Mm-hmm.
But if he took the priesthood, would that not meant he didn't fight?
No. In those days, the priests were just another kind of noble, and they were very much involved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But would the lack of the military academy training have prepared him?
Oh, he wasn't a general. He was the chaplain for the army that at the Battle of Austerlitz defeats the French revolutionaries, since he's went out with the expat royals and fought for the Austrians in this case, and helped them to drive the French back off the Preston Heights.
Is that still in print? Because I want to read that.
Alternate General's first volume.
Yeah.
It's a collection. Harry, is anyone printing that now?
I don't. I mean, I'm sure you can find secondhand copies without much trouble. You know?
Yeah, they're sold very well. There's a lot of copies.
Sadly, you can probably find pirated copies too.
Yeah.
Hey, you get it in Chinese, cheap.
Not anymore.
Yeah, at 135% of what it was. But
Yeah.
Well, 135% of $1.50, you know.
So do you?
By the way, do you know that the French celebrate Bastille Day, the storming of the Bastille, the infamous royal prison?
Right.
You know who was in the Bastille when it was stormed? Well,
No.
there was an Irish guy whose family had asked him to be imprisoned. There were 2 insane people who had to be recommitted, and 4 convicted forgers who disappeared into the crowd and resumed their careers. And that was the sum total of the prisoners in the Bastille when it was stormed by the revolutionaries.
It's the symbol of the thing.
Yeah.
So do you think with alternate history, you get to a point where you've changed so much that it stops being alt history and it becomes just fiction?
No, it's never the same, I don't think, because one of the things you have to think about when you're writing alternate history is how do I show the reader what has changed? And you need to put that in, and you need to put it in unobtrusively enough so that you don't make the reader bog down with the expository lumps. And that, I think, is a big part of the art if you're going to do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's sort of like what you're trying to do is what Tolkien did in The Lord of the Rings in a fictitious world rather than an alternate world. You're trying to suggest to the reader that, well, of course you know everything that's going on in this world. And if he asked anything, you would be able to answer it. This may not necessarily be true, but you want to create that impression.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is this a genre where you get a lot of the actually types to come out with the critiques? Because I know, like, if you write certain books, the gun people or the horse people will come out of the woodworks to tell you everything you got wrong. I would imagine the historians come out of the woodwork to critique your fictional alt history.
The gun people and the horse people, and and everybody who knows or thinks they know something about a particular topic that you haven't discussed. And sometimes they're going to be right because you're a writer. You can only do so much. You're going to make mistakes. That's part of the business.
We only have one brain to do this book, and they have probably several 100,000 brains to take it apart.
Yeah. Yeah, like I got a letter from someone about the opening scene in Dies the Fire where 2 people are carrying a stretcher with someone on it through the woods. And he said that would take at least 4 people. And I was a stretcher bearer in the military. And I've had to put 2 more characters in that scene.
An editor's note on mistakes. After Tony Weisskopf, who's now publisher of Baen Books, at the time was an editor, had a serious abdominal operation due to a problem after childbirth. The rule went out by letter to every author at Baen saying no one gets a stomach wound and keeps fighting ever again.
I believe it.
Yes.
I would have said the same thing after my hysterectomy.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Laura had a C-section for our last child. I was there when it happened. I am in complete concord. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and I had this nice.
I had appendicitis, and I turned out to have 2 appendices.
Oh, now that's special.
Appendix A and Appendix B.
and both of them were infected.
So, Mercedes, you're known for the urban fantasy stuff you write. Given that it is happening over top the existing world, would you consider that to be similar to an alternative history?
It's kind of, I mean, a lot of times if you would call it alternate history, though, the actual alternate history fans would get very angry. You put your fantasy in my alternate history. Like you put your chocolate in my peanut butter.
Mhm.
Wait, that's a
And
bad
there's
thing?
also secret histories, like the surface events are the same, but the causes underneath are different.
Mm-hmm. Or
So-
the same, or the surfaces of events and the causes are the same, but there's something else going on, parallel to and underneath what the actual history.
Mhm.
So wait, is secret history different than alt history? I thought they were synonymous.
No.
No, see, alternate history changes what happens on the surface. Secret history changes what happens behind the scenes.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
No event changes, just behind, or what we think no event changes.
Mm-hmm.
But really, something's been manipulated instead of just happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
X-Files would be secret history.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Everything's a giant Masonic conspiracy.
That's Dan Brown, right?
Where are the gigantic Masons? Wouldn't they stand out?
So do you think there's a point where the line of what is alt history and what is secret history intersect?
Oh, all the time.
Sure.
Yep.
With every conspiracy theorist out there.
Yeah.
And sometimes the conspiracies start right away. I remember I went to one of the few cons I went to, because I don't always deal well with crowds, was RavenCon when they were still in Williamsburg. So it was really small. And they had some guy that was part of the moon landing project. He was one of the rocket engineers. And so I asked him when they first started the conspiracy theories that they didn't land on the moon. And he told me that his mother-in-law asked him how they faked it the day of. And so they were convinced from then on.
Wow.
So he had some choice words about the concept of mother-in-laws, and it was an interesting rant, but side rant, but it was an interesting rant.
Yeah. Oh God.
So we're gonna.
The people who do conspiracies are usually conspiracy theorists.
They're also usually nuttier than a $45 fruitcake.
Oh, don't get me started on the Illuminati people.
Mhm.
Jesus Christ.
They're not supposed to know we're Illuminati.
Mhm.
So you're not in the know apparently about the grand conspiracy.
Mhm. Yes.
I'm doomed. I'm Jewish, Republican, Illuminati, and I work with computers. I'm in every conspiracy out there.
Well, at
How
least
come I don't have any money?
at least nobody threatened your life over it.
Mhm. Who's that band of weirdos who think that the British monarchy is secretly running the world?
And our lizards.
Yes.
Yeah.
V for the TV series V, I think, covered that.
Misty, you should explain why you just said that. At least nobody's threatened your life, because I was around for the security.
Oh yeah, wasn't that jolly? Was it about 1980? No,
About
90s,
88 or 89.
89? 88 or 89? No, it had to be a little later than that because we had this house.
You had that
And I
house.
was-
I
and
was
I was-
working. It was there.
So
94.
94,
About
yeah,
94.
94.
I was working security. It's right
I got a call from a fan who said that there is a cult, or at least they called themselves an occult group, that had already beaten up one poor woman and put her in the hospital because they thought there was this secret cabal of, well, I have this group called the Guardians in my urban fantasy Diana Tregard books, and they were calling themselves the Guardians, and this other group was another kind, sort of a subsect of the Guardians, and they thought the old Guardians were keeping back the new Guardians by repressing their powers, and so they had to get rid of us by any means necessary. And because I'd written about the Guardians, I had to be one.
Sorry.
Makes perfect sense.
Oh, it was really amusing until I found out they'd already beaten up one poor woman they accused of being an old school guardian, and they were going to come after me at Dragon Con. And the quote from the head of this cult was, "We have to go hunter killer and get rid of them by any means necessary."
I was working guest relations at the time at Dragon Con, and we had to recruit 5 extra security people just for the doors of our room. We practically patted people down.
And we still got a couple of scares. One of my guys that I'd brought along for extra security actually got ambushed and beaten up in the lobby.
Oh, I would have assumed they were just, trash talking. This was
Oh no,
this was
a
serious.
legitimate threat.
The
police were involved.
This was a legitimate threat, and actually, the only reason that he didn't manage to convince his followers to make a second attempt was he got put away for kiddie porn because he was planning to trade part of his kiddie porn collection to someone on America Online for access to a 13-year-old boy. The problem was the guy he was trading, supposedly trading his collection to, was an undercover cop. So he went to become Bubba's little boy in the Blacksburg, West Virginia prison.
You have such interesting enemies, Misty.
And he had a lot more things to think about than me when that happened.
You couldn't put that in a plot.
On that note, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly.
Probably a good idea.
And then we'll come back swinging about old history.
Across 1,000 battlefields and 1,000,000 wars, there is always a question. What do you do when all the chips are on the table? Do you run? Try to find salvation in the arms of an easy peace? Or do you stand and fight and send your enemies into whatever hole they crawled out of? On Deadly Ground, a heroic Last Stand anthology, has 10 stories addressing that question. Each character faces the impossible in different ways, but all will be tested before the day is done. Can they earn a heroic victory amongst the endless eternity of space, or are they doomed to fall into obscurity?
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So one of the questions that, some of the smart people that are helping me out came up with was how you pick the inciting incident that you use to build your alt history around. Because most of them start with one point of change and then you figure out what the knock-on consequences of that would be. So how do you pick that inciting incident?
Well, in my case, since it's mostly fantasy-oriented urban fantasy, alternate history, it's usually that it's the person who is the focus of the alternate history. Let's just take Annie Oakley, for instance, actually has magic powers and uses that in some way to change the at least the cause of what's going on, if not the actual events.
Okay. What about you, Harry? How do you go about finding what your inciting incident is going to be?
In my latest one, which is coming out in July, it's called Powerless. It's set in the West Coast People's Democratic Republic at some unknown point after Marxist-Leninism, Stalinism has become the dominant ideology in the world. I basically avoided talking about how that happened. I hint at it in the book, but I mean, the situation is, pretty much explains itself. This is what this world looks like. How it happened doesn't matter so very much. It's just, all right, in this system, how do you try to gain a little freedom within a repressive regime? if somebody who has in mind putting a little more freedom into a repressive regime somehow comes to the top, how does that person try to game a little extra freedom in a world where Russia is liable to squash you if you do things like that? And that's what the book is about, is, how do you claw out, or can you claw out little bits of freedom in a very unfree world?
Mhm.
Okay. Sterling, I know you had stepped away because you thought the commercial would be longer, but how do you pick the inciting incident when you're writing your all history?
Sometimes it just comes to me.
Okay.
The Dies the Fire is technically alternate history because the change point is before I wrote the first book. And I decided, okay, somebody is going to suspend most modern technology, and how that goes. In the Black Chamber series I did, where Teddy Roosevelt wins the election in 1912 because the Taft drops dead. It's a miracle he didn't, by the way. He was elephantine.
I cannot imagine why he didn't. I mean, I should think you could have stood 20 feet away from him and hear his arteries clog.
Yes.
And
he made Trump look slim, my God.
Yeah.
His bathtub held 170 gallons.
Well, he got stuck
Most
in
of them
the
him.
bathtub. And that's why they put in the second one. There's a picture of the workmen, of 4 workmen sitting in the new bathtub they've just installed in the White House. But I decided to do that with a flap of butterfly wings, and the actual change point in that series is in 1848, and an Irish immigrant lives instead of dying. He manages to crawl down the gangplank and on one of the coffin ships, and he has children, and the children influence the election in 1912. So that's what causes it. One of them is a friend of his and goes up San Juan Hill with him with the Rough Riders, and he gets killed in the Mexican Revolution, and that makes Teddy angrier. So he pushes Taft harder, and Taft eats even more. He gained 60 pounds during that election, by the way. And that triggers the heart attack. So one anonymous Irish immigrant living or dying changes the whole world.
How about your current series, Steve? Your current series.
To turn the tide. Some 5 American historians get sent back to 2nd century Rome by an Austrian physicist who's invented a time machine. He doesn't tell them he's invented a time machine. He tells them he's got something that will date historical artifacts. And they get there, World War III starts, and they get sent back. The physicist intended to go back too, but he didn't quite make it into the field of the time machine. He went back, but his legs from the thigh down remained in the 21st
Ah!
century. So the first thing they do is bury him. And I'm having great fun with that because, I've always been an admirer of Marcus Aurelius and his, and I actually know about his co-emperor Verus, who was a complete non-entity apparently. And
very useful trait in a co-emperor.
Yeah. And I actually put one of Harry and Judy Tarr's characters in there because the time frames overlap. So that was a lot of fun. She's a
character.
Mistress Uma. What's her name?
Nicole Gunther Perrin.
Yeah, Nicole Gunther Perrin. She gets sent back by
Household Gods.
Yeah, Household Gods. She gets sent back to the 2nd century too, and in the same area, in Carnuntum. And my characters stop at her tavern. The person she's sent back to an ancestress of hers, and that ancestress runs a tavern in Carnuntum, in Roman Carnuntum, and they stop at the tavern and have a drink and a snack. And she doesn't realize until they're just leaving that they're time travelers too. And I had a whale of a time doing that chapter. I think it's chapter 20 in the first book, to turn the tide. And I asked their permission, and they graciously gave me permission to do it. And that was a lot of fun. The whole series has been a lot of fun to write, but then
Right.
I enjoy writing.
It was fun to edit too. Writers have Easter eggs too. It's fun to find them.
Yeah. Actually, most writers enjoy writing, but some don't. I was talking to George Martin once, and he said he enjoyed having written.
Yeah, Jerry Purnell was like that too.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I like writing.
Yeah, me too. It's my hobby.
Beats working.
So Bill, when you write your alternative history, how do you pick the incidents that you use to start?
Well, I'll give you how I pick it is you find what's necessary to cause the plot, whether it's Steve's where they destroy the world so you can create a new one with a clean conscience and introduce technology in the past, or Harry's where a little event goes bloop and it just keeps going. In 1632, they dropped 3,500 American citizens from a middle-class town in the West Virginia into the middle of the 30 Years' War. And between technology and ideas and philosophy, every book after that is just the outgoing ripples of the repercussions. So I guess I'm the wrong one to ask, but from the ones I've edited and seen, I would say it's only limited by what they need to do to justify the book.
So do you guys prefer to have one big incident or a relatively minor one that causes knock-on, that butterfly effects that Misty talked about a second ago?
Sometimes
whatever works for the purposes of the story. My recent novel, 3 Miles Down, is about, the real history is that in 1968, a Soviet sub sank in 3 miles of water north of Hawaii, carrying nuclear missiles. The Russians searched for it. They couldn't find it. We searched for it. We found it with a nuclear submarine trailing cameras on the end of long cables. We took pictures of it. And the CIA spent a moon landing's worth of money, and I mean this literally, building the Hughes Glomar Explorer to bring the sub up from 3 miles down so they could examine the missiles and get the Russians' code books. And this worked. Maybe they brought up about a third of the sub and not the missiles. But I saw a book about this, and I thought, what made the sub sink? What if there's an alien ship on the bottom of the Pacific?
Yeah.
That. And that was the novel.
Very good one, too.
Thank you.
Enjoyed every minute of it.
So let's talk language. So one of the reasons I majored in colonial American history as a grad student was because I barely made it through English. So speaking foreign language like you would have to was difficult. And while medieval sounded interesting, not only would I have to learn a different language, I'd have to learn the ancient version of it. And it's kind of known that you can only go so far back before your language doesn't translate. So do you factor that in when you talk about time travel? Do you make sure the stories, if you're going to do that route, happen after the vowel shift? Or do you just stick them with a fish out of water and hope they can learn the language?
Well, my classical historians all know Latin and several of them know Greek. They turn out to have excruciable accents and have to spend several weeks becoming comprehensible, but that's easier than learning something from the get-go.
Yes.
I rarely mess with time travel as a causative agent of an alternate history. In Guns of the South, the issue was not enormous because the Confederates spoke something fairly close to English.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I wrote it better than modern people do.
They have to translate something in Afrikaans, and they have a great deal of trouble with that, but they finally find someone who can understand it.
Who can read Dutch anyway, which will, yeah.
So I realized that we didn't ask you, Mercedes, but do you prefer to have a large inciting incident or a small one?
I like small incidents.
Is there a reason that appeals to you more?
I'm very fond of do the most you can with the least you've got. So it's kind of amazing how something very small can make a huge difference.
Okay. Do you find is there a line where it's too subtle for the reader to catch? If you go something small?
Generally, no, because by the time the book is over, they've realized that the inciting incident way back there was in fact the inciting incident.
I've had problems like that. I wrote a bunch of stories about an alternate world where instead of founding Islam, Muhammad converted to Christianity on a trading mission up into Syria in the 590s and ended up an archbishop in Spain writing hymns like "There is no God but God and Christ is his son." And I made this very plain, I thought, in the stories, and I sent one to an editor who shall be nameless and genderless and all that good stuff. And this person said to me, "This isn't a bad story, but I can't tell where the real history stops and the alternate history leaves off." And I said, "Oh." I never did sell this person any stories, but that's just the breaks.
It's probably a good thing that it was before Zoom call, so they couldn't see your face.
Yeah, really.
Oh God. Yeah.
So is there a reason you prefer not to use time travel as your method to get the inciting incident, Harry?
No, it's just the ideas that involve it haven't mostly occurred to me. Although it's funny, I have a story coming out in very soon now in Asimov's that's called "The Fight Goes On," that's centered on Sarajevo, and time travelers for about 250 years have all been going back to Sarajevo in 1914 and trying to change or rechange or unchange what happens there. And the result of this is, of course, that in Sarajevo, on the day of the inciting incident, there is an enormous crowd of time travelers going back to Sarajevo and all trying to interfere with one another. And so yes.
That's quite fun.
There was a Three Stooges episode a million years ago when they were making homebrew beer, and they discover, "Did you put in the yeast? I put in the yeast. I put in the yeast. I put in the yeast. Oh my God, we all put in the yeast." Then things start exploding. It's like
It's like Commedia dell'arte of the alternate history there.
Yeah. Poul Anderson did a series of time travel stories, and there's a time patrol that keeps people from changing history. And one of the things they do is police things like the life of Jesus and the assassination at Sarajevo to keep time travelers from inadvertently changing things because they want to go back there and do the tourist thing.
Yeah, I believe there's an observation, and it's something about they're at the mount, they're at Gehenna and up at the mount, and he says, "Yeah, there are 8 locals and about 300 time travelers we have to keep interfering with every time."
Mm-hmm.
There's also the Silverberg up the line, which I think was the first person. I think Bob was the first person to point out, the problem of drawing a crowd to an event in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Time tourism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, languages would be a problem, but a lot of people study ancient languages. I don't think our sound reconstructions are going to be 100% correct.
That just means you talk funny, guy. Where the heck are you from?
Exactly. But, if you're talking 2nd century Latin, there's this enormous empire, and there's going to be all sorts of regional accents.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get away with that. But
Northern Britannia. Always say Northern Britannia, just like the Coneheads are from France.
mhm.
We're from France.
As an editor on language, what I found doing probably 25 or 30 of these as an editor is that you do your best to ignore problems with language, because we're writing it in English for people who are going to read it in English, and it's fiction. So you're going to read words in English. If you can have something going, I don't quite understand it, but you need a magic translator or someone on the bridge of the Enterprise that can translate instantly or something, or the plot bogs down and you have to send it back to the author to cut those 3 chapters and stop doing that.
Mhm. Actually, Tony Weisskopf at Bain objected to some of the swearing into Turn the Tide, and so I just translated it into Latin, which solved the problem. Like I had a chapter that opened with "General, we're fucked," and she objected.
It's soldiers.
Yeah, so I just substituted "legate futui sumus." Yeah.
Your audiobook narrators probably hate you for having to learn how to do all that. So I know there was a movie, 04, 05, something like that, A Sound of Thunder. I don't know if you've seen it. It's based on a Ray Bradbury story.
Ray Bradbury story, yeah.
Yeah, about the butterfly effect, essentially. Tourists, and they only do something really small. They literally step on a butterfly.
Step
and
on a
causes-
butterfly.
That's not Ray Bradbury, that's David Drake. Butterfly effect.
No, I think Bradbury did it too.
Bradbury did.
Yeah, the movie A Sound of Thunder was based on the 1952 Bradbury short story.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah,
But,
David Drake does the same thing going back to dinosaur era.
Okay. I'll have to check that one out too. But yeah, I always found that interesting. Or if you've read the movie, if you watch the movie Time Travel, where it's set in medieval France and the whole point was the time was made right by them actually going back in time and having this romance. But they, of course, when they die, the glasses that they had from modern times are found carbon dated to be this ancient stuff in the body. So that's something a lot of people don't always consider. It's not just the changes you make in real life, but the things you leave behind when you succumb as well.
One of Paul Anderson's early books was a son of a researcher who went back in time to the cave period era and survived for 2 years among early, about 10,008 BC. And just to mess with people, he put E = MC squared in an outline of a jet on the wall. And then at the end of the book, he's waiting there when the archaeologists find it.
Boy, those Australopithecines were really advanced.
Oh, that is awesome. Do you guys do any of that in your story? Leave some of those like attempts at little history humor that the history nerds will get, but maybe it'll just kind of be read over by everyone else?
Oh, good God, yes. That's part of it.
That's what makes it interesting to see if anybody does catch those Easter eggs.
Yeah.
So, Misty, what was one of yours?
Oh, me? Oh, gosh. Well, it wasn't so much history as I dropped a character by quite another from Peter Wimsey from the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries. I dropped into one of my fantasies, and he sort of ended up demanding his own book, as they do. But it took not too many people realize he's Lord Peter Wimsey.
I have in the war that came early, where World War II started over Czechoslovakia instead of in 38 rather than Poland in 39. I drop Herman Wouk's Pug Henry into the embassy in Berlin, and
nice.
Unnamed, but if you know, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He's
I had
recognizable.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I had my protagonist in To Turn the Tide kept a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations in the original Greek with him when he was a soldier and on deployments, and he used to read it. So when he actually meets Marcus Aurelius, he makes a quote from the Meditations, which Marcus Aurelius hasn't written yet because he wrote it during the Marcomannic Wars. And Marcus Aurelius looks at him and says, "You echo my own thoughts on the matter, but I had not yet put them into so compact and eloquent a form."
Yet is the operative word.
Yeah.
One
So
of the things,
eventually Marcus Aurelius gets a copy of his own meditations and decides to edit it.
His Greek was a little shaky. He learned it pretty well, and it's not terrific Greek.
It's written in high school Greek.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Most of Roman Latin speakers could speak Greek, but
Oh, yeah. Read it and speak.
But it was a varying quality. Marcus Aurelius comments that people from like Britannia or northwestern Gaul who go to Athens for the schools often speak a very strange form of Greek at first.
So one of the things that everyone thinks when they think alt history, they go with large, universally important events like world wars, etc. But I watched a movie. I don't know if you guys seen the movie Yesterday, in an alternate reality where the Beatles, for whatever reason,
yes, I haven't seen it, and I really intend to.
Oh, where the one Indian guy does it. Yeah,
I love the premise.
So, do you think? Do you guys enjoy sometimes where it's just smaller stakes? I mean, at the end of the day, music isn't going to, burn the world down necessarily.
I do like the smaller stakes. I don't think you need to save the world every time.
Mm-hmm.
You do what you need to do for the story. Sometimes it's going to be big, sometimes it's going to be small. You do what you do, and as the ideas come to you.
I think taking the Beatles out of the 60s would have big knock-on effects, though, eventually.
Yeah,
hairstyles for one.
The entire Great Britain would go broke instead of in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
They were their largest for 2 years. They were the largest single cause of money coming into Britain in the country because all those royalties and all those records were coming from there.
Mm-hmm. And people would meet while on a tour, and they'd marry and they'd have kids, and they wouldn't marry and wouldn't have kids if they didn't meet at the concert. So things like that, little things lead to big things.
Actually, I went to the McCormick Place Beatles concert with a really cute little gal named Joyce. I won't give the last name. And after she saw Paul, I had no choice and no chance at all. And we broke up. Who knows? I might have, been married in high school otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember going to a Jethro Tull concert once, and the head of the group went up to the microphone and said, "I can smell you're all having a good time." You could have gotten high just by sitting.
Oh
in the
gosh, yes.
Oh yes. So I smoked dope for the first time at a Jethro Tull concert. Probably not the same one you were at.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been any of them.
Yeah. But Jethro Tull actually did a lot of historical songs.
Yes.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
The funny thing about that was that the band that opened for them was War, when Eric Burdon was still fronting them. And years later, the daughter of one of the guys in War and my eldest daughter were the two smartest kids all the way through elementary school in their grade. And I was thinking, God damn, I saw you years before our kids were born.
So what event today would you change if you were writing an alternate history 100 years in the future? If you were and you were looking back to current times, what would you change, do you think?
Well, actually, I just did that in To Turn the Tide. It's set in 2032. And whenever I do a near future SF story, I put it in an alternate universe because predicting the future is Mug's game. Science fiction authors are almost as bad as professional futurists at it. So I just mentioned that that the president of the time, and I don't give his name, ran for a third term by ignoring the 22nd Amendment, and that puts it in an alternate history.
Mm-hmm. We hope.
I think
You haven't looked at the headlines last month.
I think I would like something a little more hopeful. I think I would do something very similar to For All Mankind, where we didn't give up on the space race.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Harry?
Impeached, convicted, removed,
Oh yeah,
declared
would be nice.
ineligible.
Or drop dead of a heart attack. That would be fun.
Too many Big Macs.
Too many Big Macs.
Yeah, although you've got to consider vice presidents.
What would be the effect of that? If you were writing the futurist on it.
Well, we have Vance, who is more of a
No. This would be after the attempted coup in 2021. So Dan Quayle would be president for about 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I'm not Dan Quayle. Mike Pence. Excuse me.
Pence.
Mike Pence.
Then, and then Biden. And then,
nobody liked Mike Pence. So there you go.
No, not even his own party likes him.
No.
It's amazing what somebody trying to get you killed will do to will do to your affiliation in the party.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I feel a little sorry. I actually feel a little sorry for Mike Pence, because he actually has no idea why he's so disliked.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks he's sincerely and truly, to the depths of his heart, thinks that he is doing everything right and everything that is good.
A lot of people.
Those people are dangerous.
Yep.
Mm.
Besides, wasn't he a lawyer too?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, in several dialects of English, lawyer and liar are pronounced exactly the same.
I don't know. I think if I was going to change something, probably, mostly because it's my experience, but I'd probably change something in the Iraq War. I remember because I was actually in the middle of a firefight the day Bush got on that aircraft carrier and said the conflict is coming to an end. So it'd be interesting to explore what might have happened if it really had ended shortly thereafter. Because, there was another 15 years.
Yeah.
I remember that shocking moment when I realized that people I served with would have kids legally old enough to fight in the war at a certain point in time. And it definitely shaped a generation. So I would be curious to see what would happen. I'd have to do some research if it ended when he said it did that first time. It might be interesting.
Of course, people in that part of the world are always shooting at each other.
Absolutely. But it would be would the West, as it were, be involved at a certain point? Because being there, you encourage the people that don't like the West to kind of continue to dogpile, and things can escalate. Whereas if you remove the red from the bowl, maybe it calms down. I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Write it. See what happens.
Yeah.
If I was going to do any time travel, though, I'd like to steal Harry's idea of Guns of the South, but set it in the Revolution. Maybe go back with an M2, Maudus, Browning, and see what happens when the Brits land in New York. Of course, that might end the war in a day. So I don't know. It might be too much.
One of the things that Eric and we were going to do in the
1632.
No, in the Heirs of Alexandria series.
The ultimate show.
Where the change there is that the Great Library of Alexandria was never burned down. Hypatia of Alexandria became a Christian saint. You had the knock-on effect of women getting equal rights with men much earlier. Of course, you got the magic going in there too. And one of the things we were going to do is the new world was going to get an influx of modern quotes around that, Germanic immigrants who were not colonialists. So when the English turned up and the Spanish turned up wanting to do colonial mayhem on the New World, there is a whole bunch of people there going, I don't think so.
Interesting.
With contemporary weapons.
The other interesting one would be, and Stirling might eventually cover this, but what would happen if the Roman Empire never fell? Mark Allen Idleheit, who writes sort of alt history fantasy, had talked about doing that someday. His Steiger's Tigers is basically what happens if the missing 9th Roman Legion ends up smack dab in the middle of Middle Earth. Is kind of the vibe. But I could be interesting to see what happens if Rome doesn't fall.
That's funny. I did that almost 60 years ago.
Oh, what's the name of it? I'm gonna look it up.
Oh, you will never find it because it was unpublishable. I was 18. I didn't know that. I was writing fanfic. I dropped a bunch of Romans into 4th Age Gondor 1,000 years after the ring went into the fire.
Isn't it amazing how many of us started with fanfic?
That wasn't started. I'd done other things before that were also no damn good. But
Steve, with
later, I stripped mine bits and pieces of the plot and a few of the characters for the Videssos books, which are set in my own universe. Funny how that works. That's an improvement if you're actually going to try and sell something.
Well, the thing is that, that's the whole Ray Bradbury. You've got to write 1,000,000 words of crap before you manage to get rid of all of the crap in your system, and you start writing good stuff.
Yeah, first 1,000,000 words of practice.
Yeah. But it's also something that I've pointed out, which is that you often, as a young writer, start out with the ambition to do something you just don't have the tools for.
Yeah.
But keep that stuff around because you can mine it later.
Yep.
When you do have the tools
That's
for it.
important.
Steve, with your permission, I'm a reader of Steve's, and he's about to have a sequel series to his Roman history series there. Do you want to talk about the timeline and what that'll be? Or should I do it?
It's set many centuries after my time travelers arrive in Rome, and it's basically Rome never falls, and there's a Roman Empire in space.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
You've got my attention and my money. Go on.
Mm-hmm. And they find out that it's sometime in the remote past, humans were abducted from Earth and scattered on planets around, and there have been interstellar states and that sort of thing. And the Romans are pitchforked into it long after the latest interstellar empire fell, and there were a bunch of warlords and quasi-barbarians around using technology they don't understand. It's more advanced than what the Romans have, but the Romans understand theirs. So, and there's kerfuffle ensues. I've just actually finished plotting out the first one. It's going to be a collaboration like Bain likes to do. And that was interesting. I was trying, you get an advanced technological culture, but it's based on 2nd century Rome, and it's going to be different. I mean, like, the fact that Western civilization was Christian for a long time had very substantial effects on what eventually came out on top in the stew. And if it was based on pre-Christian religions and so forth, you would get a very different mix.
Yeah, generally
human beings like revenge. All human beings do, but we feel guilty about it. Romans didn't feel guilty about revenge, generally speaking. They exulted in it, and it was a moral imperative. So that's actually Mary Renaud did some very good historical novels set in classical times, mostly in Greece. And there's one of hers is it's set in Athens right after the end of the Peloponnesian War. The 30 tyrants are in charge, and the 30 tyrants have the father of the protagonist murdered, and he comes across his dad just as he's dying, and his father says, "Avenge my blood." And the son, who's portrayed as a very philosophical and moral person, says, "Father, how could you think I should be so base of soul as to forgive my enemies?" And that was a nice hit of alien attitude. And I was struck by that when I first read that book in my teens, and I thought, you gotta show people who are really different if you're dealing with a really different culture. And she did it magnificently, in my opinion.
She wrote so damn well too. Oh my!
Oh yes, she did. God, she was good.
That's one of the complaints that from people that study history, that read alt history, have always complained, is people make the Romans too nice. They generally
have to do it to a certain degree, or modern people will not be able to stomach them.
You got to like your hero. You made a Roman like a Roman, and slavery and ambition is the best emotion you can have and stuff. Now you want the ultimate nice Roman, Star Trek.
Yeah.
All modeled on the perfect Roman Empire for 1950.
Yeah.
Actually, there were Romans who disapproved of gladiatorial games, but they didn't disapprove of them because of what happened to the gladiators. They disapproved of it because they thought it was bad for the character of the spectators, which, is a nice little evidence of real fundamental differences.
There's a reason why the Romans are often the bad guys if they're portrayed accurately.
It wasn't a matter of there being the bad guys and other people being the good guys. You go back that far, and you're in a really alien world.
Yes,
you go back by now. You go back farther than about 1930, and you're in a really alien world.
Mm-hmm.
Attitudes of race, attitude, what you could and couldn't do about disease, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mother grew up in Peru, and in the 20s and 30s, and one of her friends died of the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, and another one died of rabies after an infected bat got caught in her hair and scratched her and bit her. And that's just an alien experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is that something you factor in when you write your time travel? Because obviously if you wrote the medical as it was, a lot of times the protagonist can't live for the plot to happen. So do you have them just learn the medicine, or just
actually lucky? the Viennese scientist who sends them back with a metric ton of stuff, and it includes antivirals and antibiotics. Otherwise, you'd die in a pool of your own wastes within a couple of weeks, probably. The disease environments in the past, like in Shakespeare's time, there were 5 burials for every baptism in London.
Yeah.
You had to get immense numbers of people coming in from the countryside.
Cities were population sinks. You came in and you died preferentially.
Yeah, exactly.
I did a database of all my regiment in the Guns of the South, and there are more people dying of smallpox and measles than there are of gunshot wounds there.
Mm-hmm.
During the war.
The first campaign in which more people died in combat than of diseases was World War I on the Western Front.
And that's just because they worked so hard at shooting each other and running into the machine gun.
No. Actually, they had disease theory, and it was applied, and there were fewer casualties from disease on the Western Front. But in Eastern Europe, it was the old story. There were more deaths from disease than from combat.
Yeah, typhoid, typhus, all that good stuff. And, a lot of people were vaccinated against smallpox by then.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have epidemics in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
In the in the 1632 verse stuff that I did with Eric, I recognized a big fat hole. He had a doctor, but the doctor doesn't know how to compound medicine.
Mhm.
So I gave the town a logical thing, which is a compounding pharmacist.
There you go.
Mhm.
So he's got all the books that tell you how to compound the stuff, and that's what gives a doctor something to work with.
Yeah. Like germ theory made a massive difference even before antibiotics
Mhm.
because people knew about germs and they worked out ways to avoid infections. Like childbirth used to be extremely dangerous because of
Oh
infection.
yeah. Oh
Yes.
yeah.
And if you know about antisepsis, the infant mortality rate just goes like that.
If you know about sepsis, you know to have a very simple spray of carbolic acid going over the operating theater.
There's
exactly.
there's an account of the Mormon temple in the 1880s, and they had a communal water cup that went around, and people all drank from it. Nobody thought anything of it. And boy, you bet all kinds of nice things spread that way.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's why big concentrations of people were deadly.
Yep.
I mean, all their wastes and just infection.
30 wells in London. Cholera.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, are there any? It's a little bit of a segue because we don't want to depress them too much with the state of what lack of medicine might look like. Are there any concepts in alternative history that you haven't touched that you might think would be fun to do? Sterling, do you got something?
No, I'm pointing at other people.
Oh,
I think I would introduce a technology like the ability to see things in the past but not hear them or something, just a very limited technology, and show how the knowledge of how things really were would affect our world today and going forward in the future.
Somebody did that. Somebody did that story in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
I don't.
I can find it. I know which anthology it's in. The title and author escape me right this minute.
But I think that would have a profound effect and give us a very different society very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things as historians is what they don't write down is as important as what they do, because at some point it's assumed that you know certain things, so you don't need to write it down. And then, of course, in the future, we don't know those things.
Yeah, Polybius had no tactics at all. Very frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people don't mention things that everybody knows. So, and then 1,000 years later, everybody doesn't know it. So, making the context of what does survive is sort of complicated.
But I want to hear what you guys want to do. Might want to do next. Still.
Alfred the Great died young.
Oh.
Because he was crucial in preventing the Vikings from overrunning the whole of Anglo-Saxon England. That might be an interesting alternate. And
that
he was
interesting. I said, that would be an interesting one. I'm just picturing.
I've been playing with in late November 1864. The Confederates tried to burn down New York City. What if they'd done it before the election and they'd really done it?
Yeah.
They had assorted infernal devices, but the weather was against them and the winds were against them, and nothing, not nearly as much happened as they wanted.
But potentially that would be devastating because they didn't really have much in the way of fire control equipment.
No, indeed.
No, it was all wood, just like London and Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Jack Finney's Time and Again talks about that a lot, set, in the early 1880s.
Okay. What about you,
What if somebody had sniped Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans?
Oh,
Ooh.
That's a good one.
Mhm.
we'd have lost a good song.
But we'd have had a treasury the whole time then.
Yeah, Andy Jackson was not the most sophisticated man when it came to economic theory, let's put it that way.
No.
He shut the federal bank
Mhm.
because it was trying to collect from the farmers.
Mhm. Well, Andy Jackson was an interesting guy. He was what they called a killing gentleman in those days. He probably killed something like 15 to 20 people with his own hands in various
Mhm.
uprising duels.
Mm-hmm.
Over 100 duels by his own brag.
Yep. Oh, and his wife's first husband was last seen running into a swamp with Andy Jackson chasing him with brandishing a big knife. He got away. He turned up in Ohio later, but it's a good thing Andy didn't catch him for him.
Okay. Do you have any that you would like to do, Mercedes?
That's
Well,
a very
if you
good
do a game of-
question. I'd actually like to, if I ever get the chance to, I'd like to do the book that Eric and I talked about doing, which is take my courtesan along with the oh God, now I can't remember. I'm blanking on the founder of the Jesuits.
Loyola?
Loyola, along with Loyola, down to the Mongols to recruit them against the Chinese.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So obviously we mentioned the dragon in the beginning, and I'd like to wrap it up with that. So, Bill,
Dragon Awards, People's Choice Award, DragonCon.org/award, or just put Dragon Award in. Please, everybody, come vote for Misty, Steve, Harry, whoever gets nominated. They've all got books that can be nominated. Or anyone else you like, books, comics, games, movies, all categories on there. And we'd welcome everyone so that we can have more of these winners sessions. And thank you, everyone who's a winner here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks
It's
for having me on.
a very, very pretty award.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And I was very surprised to get it.
You should have seen this the first time.
I was astonished.
Same here.
Absolutely astonished.
I was just disappointed to hear they didn't give you a dragon with the Dragon Award.
Come on now, you listen. I've got a lot of experience in raising raptors, and where are you going to put all the meat for that? For a single serving?
That's a valid concern.
It's a bad enough with a single hawk, and they're under a pound.
Yeah.
Where are you going to put all that meat?
I just have a vision of that little dragon that Daenerys had in the TV series.
Yeah.
And you notice they didn't show the flocks being brought up to it. The actual Dragon Award looks a little like a flame on purpose. The original thought was to go back to the very beginning of literature, of all storytelling, around the campfire in the caves, perhaps 50,000, 100,000 years ago, and the beginnings of language. And the flame of literature, the flame of ideas continues, and that's what our award's a model of, if you didn't know what it came to.
Wow, I did not know that.
I didn't know that. I like that. That's kind of poetic. So
thank you. I'm the one who did it.
Well done, sir. Well done. This is the part, dear listener, where I remind you.
I was on the committee.
I'm still giving you all the credit because you're here right now.
Good point.
So this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. So do your part. It really does matter. You can review them wherever you buy them. You can start your own website and review them there. You can hop over to Goodreads. It's a nice place to review books. Tell a friend, tell a dozen friends, and buy them copies too. Just spread the word. It really does matter, because if there's a series you like and nobody reads it, they don't write more of them. So, pimp it out. And with that, we're going to, Bill, how can they track you down on the internet? And as usual, all of these links will be in the show notes.
My last series would be bloodandarmor.com. Bloodandarmor.com, modern, near future military tech. My alternate in that is the Kurds got to have their own nation, which never happened in reality because the English hated them.
It's a good book, too. I've read it. Harry, as usual, everything will be in the show notes, but how can listeners find you if they want to engage with your...
I am on Blue Sky at HNTDove, and you will find me flogging my books there rather relentlessly, as a matter of fact.
As one does.
I steal Daryl Schweitzer's line, and he knows I do, too. May I shamelessly try to sell you a book, or even two.
Outstanding. All right, Mercedes, how can we find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
I believe I've got a Facebook page. We've got a backer kit going, and we're going to be having ongoing backer kits, I believe. The next one, the current one is the anthology. The next one is going to be resetting all of the songs from the first Valdemar books.
It's a Valdemar anthology.
And the anthology is a Valdemar anthology, but we're going to be resetting and re-recording all the songs from the original Valdemar books.
Nice. And backer kit, if you're not familiar with it, dear listeners, seems to be similar to like a Kickstarter or any of those other crowdfunding type programs. And looks like Misty has a large following in an account where they're making nicer copies for your library shelves. Just about everything you could ask for. Who doesn't want a dozen leather-bound books in your library? And Steve, how can they find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
Well, I'm on Facebook as Stephen Michael Stirling. There's an SM Stirling Appreciation Society group on Facebook. I have a website, smstirling.com, where I post sample chapters of upcoming books, and I defy you to read 6 chapters and then not buy the book. And that's about it.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, Blasters and Blades Podcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans for Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-host duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, people, and then they'll swim away on a river of Java. If you want some of that coffee brand coffee, link is in the show notes. Code is Podcast Grunts. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. All right, thank you all for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Coffee!
So no decaf, none at all.
Coffee, 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 coffee.